I fucking hate menus in video games. Usually I'm just spamming A to get through them as fast as possible, but then I played Persona 5. Yes, I know I'm literally 8 years late to the party, but oh my god, this game is so stylish that even the menus exude this energy and flair that makes you want to spend as much time as possible just scrolling through them. Clicking certain options will change the entire portrait and layout of the menu. Silhouettes are used to playfully indicate actions that are being taken, and the music, I mean, come on, you know how good Persona 5 music is. But the weird thing about Persona is that the actual graphical fidelity, you know, the quality of the 3D models, kinda look like shit. Considering the game came out 8 years ago, it's not that surprising, but for a video game known for its aesthetics, shouldn't these low poly models feel jarring or out of place? That's definitely how I felt about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I mean, the graphics in that game just straight up looked horrible. But what if I were to say that Scarlet and Violet actually had better 3D graphics than Persona? Let's take this image from Scarlet and Violet and compare it to an image from Persona 5. As you can see, the lighting is actually a bit better, and the new textures added make the 3D models technically higher quality than the character models from Persona. But despite having technically better graphics, Pokemon as a whole looks a million times worse than Persona. But why? The simple reason here is that Persona 5 doesn't rely on its low quality models to carry its cutscene. Let me give an example. Here's a cutscene from Pokemon wherein you first battle Nemona. Now, this is arguably one of the best cutscenes in the game. It's at the beginning of your journey, and it had a lot of thought put into it. The use of the dynamic camera angles provides some flair, and 3D model for Nemona actually isn't half bad. So I would say this is Pokemon at its finest. Now let's look at Persona 5's dialogue scenes, and this scene is really just a throwaway one, so you could call this Persona at its worst. Still, you can see how many visual layers they've added on top of the existing scene with the 3D models. A black star effect covering part of the screen, a drawing of the character expressing some emotion, a text box that's constantly moving. I mean, just immediately, this game is more visually interesting to look at. But it's not just the amount of visual elements that make these dialogue scenes so good, it's the way they're used and the flow that it creates. This game relies on its 3D models to do most of the actual action, but after the action occurs, a portrait of that character appears directing your eye this way. Then a text box appears directing your eye to the dialogue itself, and then back to the action with the 3D models, creating a sort of flow that keeps this cutscene more interesting. And in between certain lines of dialogue, sometimes a screen tear graphic pops up with a close-up of the character's eyes, adding even more life in these simple cutscenes. And again, this is Persona at its worst. Persona 5's dialogue doesn't feel like a slog because it's always visually interesting the entire way through. And this is what Pokemon is missing in its storytelling and cutscenes. It doesn't need to have the best rendered cutscenes to look good, it just really needs some cleaner UI changes and personality. Here's a quick mock-up I made that I think just makes the scene look a bit better. And listen, I know this mock-up looks like shit, this is just to convey my point, okay? When you add a bunch of other visual elements to reinforce a 3D model, all of a sudden it's not the main focus of our scrutiny. And I did all this in 10 minutes in Photoshop. Obviously with more love and attention, this could look a lot cleaner. And to glaze Persona 5 even more, let's look at its battle UI. It genuinely looks stunning, with clear, distinguishable actions that are all tied to different buttons. The fact that people are cosplaying as the fucking user interface for a video game should tell you how amazing it is. Now, contrastingly, I don't actually think Pokemon's battle UI is that bad. It's been refined over many years, and it serves its purpose quite well, but it could definitely use a little bit of spice to make it more interesting. Funnily enough, I actually think Legends Arceus does that perfectly with its battle UI, tying each button press to a functionality and having this cool calligraphy font for each one. And as much as I would love to keep talking about menus in video games, the problems with Scarlet and Violet aren't necessarily the menus. Yes, a visual overhaul of the existing dialogue cutscenes would make the story a lot better, but again, this wasn't the major problem I had with Pokemon. It's really the open world. When I was first playing Violet, I remember my roommate walking in on me and asking me what I was playing. When I said Pokemon, he was like, "Damn, you still play older Pokemon games?" And as I sat there crying, I realized that I am playing a fucking shit game. This lifeless, barren wasteland of an open world is easily Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's biggest problem. And although Persona isn't a great example for an open world game, there is a better game that has even worse graphics but somehow still looks amazing. Okami. Now, this game came out in 2006. I was literally 5 years old when it first came out, so admittedly, I've never played it myself. But I remember watching my older cousin go through the levels in this game, and that ink art style just stuck with me. Despite the technical technical limitations of the time, Okami is still one of the most visually distinctive games of all time. Using a super recognizable cel-shaded art style, every single moment of this game feels like it's visually cohesive, and this is something true of Persona 5 as well. All of the visual elements in that game genuinely feel like they belong, and they add to the overall aesthetic. Now, Pokemon can't go for an ink theming across its entire open world, but there are a lot of ideas they could try at least. I mean, shit, look at what this guy on Twitter mocked up for a Gen 1 remake in the Sugimori style. Now, this is a little more than just cel shading that most games like Zelda use, so it's probably unfeasible for a mainline Pokemon game, but it does leave me wishing that Game Freak would spend less time trying to make their 1000+ 3D models look better and just focus on creating a distinct visual style for Pokemon itself, developing lighting techniques and shaders that can capitalize on the limited animations that they've already created. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the graphics don't really matter when it comes to having a visually appealing game. What matters are the design choices your art team makes and how they all come together to deliver an experience that feels like you are living in this world and its aesthetic. So basically, style is what really matters. Thanks for watching.